Don't forget to subscribe. Afterwards, the wisest and most spiritual books from the greatest authors await you every day. And now buckle up, sit back and we'll begin. Carlos Castaneda. Book 6. Eagle's Gift. The Nagual Woman. Don Juan said that when he was put in the care of the westerly women to be cleansed, he was also put under the guidance of the northerly woman who was comparable to Florinda, the number one stalker, who taught him the principles of that art. She and his benefactor gave him the actual means to secure the 3 male warriors, the 1 courier, and the 4 female stalkers who were to make up his party. The 8 female seers of his benefactor's group had searched for the distinctive configurations of luminosity and had had no difficulty whatever in finding the appropriate types of male and female warriors for Don Juan's party. His benefactor, however, did not permit those seers to do anything to gather the warriors they had found. It was left to Don Juan to apply the principles of stalking and secure them. The first warrior to appear was Vicente. Don Juan did not have enough of a command of stalking to be able to draft him. His benefactor and the northerly stalker had to do most of the work. Then came Silvio Manuel, later Don Genaro, and finally Emilito, the courier. Florinda was the first female warrior. She was followed by Zoila, then Delia, and then Carmela. Don Juan said that his benefactor had insisted relentlessly that they deal with the world exclusively in terms of controlled folly. The end result was a stupendous team of practitioners who thought up and executed the most intricate schemes. When they had all acquired a degree of proficiency in the art of stalking, their benefactor thought it was time for him to find the Nagual woman for them, which he did. But before he brought her into their world, and true to his policy of helping everyone to help themselves, he waited not only until all of them were expert stalkers, but until Don Juan had learned to see. Although Don Juan regretted immensely the time wasted in waiting, he conceded that their joint effort in securing her created a stronger tie among all of them. It revitalized their commitment to seek their freedom. His benefactor began to unfold his strategy for drawing in the Nagual woman by all of a sudden becoming a devout Catholic. He demanded that Don Juan, being the heir to his knowledge, behave like a son and go to church with him. He dragged him to mass nearly every day. Don Juan said that his benefactor, who was very charming and glib, would introduce him to everyone in church as his son, a bone setter. Don Juan, by his own account an uncivilized pagan at that time, was mortified to find himself in social situations where he had to talk and give an account of himself. He put his mind at ease with the idea that his benefactor had an ulterior motive for everything he was doing. He attempted to deduce from observing him what his reasons might be. His benefactor's actions were consistent and seemed above board. As an exemplary Catholic, he gained the trust of scores of people, especially the parish priest, who held him in high esteem, considering him a friend and confidant. Don Juan could not figure out what he was up to. The thought crossed his mind that his benefactor might have sincerely taken up Catholicism or gone mad. He had not yet understood that a warrior never loses his mind under any circumstances. Don Juan's qualms about going to church vanished when his benefactor began introducing him to the daughters of people he was acquainted with. He enjoyed that, although he felt ill at ease. Don Juan thought that his benefactor was helping him to exercise his tongue. He was neither glib nor charming, and his benefactor had said that an Nagual, perforce, has to be both. One Sunday during Mass, after nearly a year of almost daily attendance, Don Juan found out the real reason for their going to church. He was kneeling next to a girl named Linda, the daughter of one of his benefactor's acquaintances. He turned to exchange a glance with her, as had become their custom after months of daily contact. Their eyes met, and suddenly Don Juan saw her as a luminous being, and then he saw her doubleness. Linda was a double woman. His benefactor had known it all along, and had taken the most difficult path in order to put Don Juan in touch with her. Don Juan confessed to us that the moment was overwhelming to him. His benefactor knew that Don Juan had seen. His mission to put the double beings together had been completed successfully and impeccably. He stood up and his eyes swept every corner of that church, then he walked out without a backward glance. There was nothing more for him to do there. Don Juan said that when his benefactor walked out in the middle of Mass, all heads turned. Don Juan wanted to follow him, but Linda boldly clasped his hand and held him back. He knew then that the power of seeing had not been his alone. Something had gone through both of them and they were transfixed. Don Juan realized all of a sudden that not only had the Mass ended, but that they were already outside the church. His benefactor was trying to calm Linda's mother, who was incensed and shamed by their unexpected and inadmissible display of affection. Don Juan was at a loss as to what to do next. He knew that it was up to him to figure out a plan. He had the resources, but the importance of the event made him lose confidence in his ability. He forsook his training as a stalker and became lost in the intellectual dilemma of whether or not to treat Linda as controlled folly. His benefactor told him that he could not help him. His duty had been only to put them together, and that was where his responsibility ended. It was up to Don Juan to take the necessary steps to secure her. He suggested that Don Juan even consider marrying her, if that was what was needed. Only after she came to him of her own accord could he help Don Juan by directly intervening with her as an agual. Don Juan tried a formal courtship. He was not well received by her parents, who could not conceive of someone from a different social class as a suitor for their daughter. Linda was not an Indian. Her family were middle-class urban dwellers, owners of a small business. The father had other plans for his daughter. He threatened to send her away if Don Juan persisted in his intention to marry her. Don Juan said that double beings, especially women, are extraordinarily conservative, even timid. Linda was no exception. After their initial exhilaration in church, she was overtaken by caution, and then by fear. Her own reactions scared her. As a strategic maneuver, his benefactor made Don Juan retreat, to make it appear as if he were acquiescing to his father, who had not approved of the girl, which was the assumption of everyone who had witnessed the incident in church. People gossiped that their display had displeased his father so intensely that his father, who was such a devout Catholic, had never returned to church. His benefactor told Don Juan that a warrior is never under siege. To be under siege implies that one has personal possessions that could be blockaded. A warrior has nothing in the world except his impeccability, and impeccability cannot be threatened. Nonetheless, in a battle for one's life, such as the one Don Juan was waging to secure the Nagual woman, a warrior should strategically use every means available. Accordingly, Don Juan resolved to use any portion of his stalker's knowledge that he had to get the girl. To that end, he engaged Silvio Manuel to use his sorcerer's arts, which even at that early stage were formidable, to abduct the girl. Silvio Manuel and Gennaro, who was a true daredevil, stole into the girl's house disguised as old washerwomen. It was midday and everyone in the house was busy preparing food for a large group of relatives and friends who were coming to dinner. They were having an informal going-away party for Olinda. Silvio Manuel was counting on the likelihood that people who saw two strange washerwomen coming in with bundles of clothes would assume that it had to do with Olinda's party and would not get suspicious. Don Juan had supplied Silvio Manuel and Gennaro beforehand with all the information they needed concerning the routines of the members of the household. He told them that the washerwomen usually carried their bundles of washed clothes into the house and left them in a storage room to be ironed. Carrying a large bundle of clothes, Silvio Manuel and Gennaro went directly into that room, knowing that Olinda would be there. Don Juan said that Silvio Manuel went up to Olinda and used his mesmeric powers to make her faint. They put her inside a sack, wrapped the sack with her bed sheets, and walked out, leaving behind the bundle they had carried in. They bumped into her father at the door. He did not even glance at them. Don Juan's benefactor was utterly put out with their maneuver. He ordered Don Juan to take the girl back immediately to her house. It was imperative, he said, that the double woman come to the benefactor's house of her own free will, perhaps not with the idea of joining them, but at least because they interested her. Don Juan felt that everything was lost. The odds against getting her back into her house unnoticed were too great, but Silvio Manuel figured out a solution. He proposed that they should let the four women of Don Juan's party take the girl to a deserted road, where Don Juan would rescue her. Silvio Manuel wanted the women to pretend that they were kidnapping her. At some point along the road someone would see them and come in pursuit. Their pursuer would overtake them and they would drop the sack, with a degree of force, so as to be convincing. The pursuer would be, of course, Don Juan, who would happen miraculously to be at just the right place at the right time. Silvio Manuel demanded true-to-life action. He ordered the women to gag the girl, who by then would surely be awake and screaming inside the sack, and then to run for miles carrying the sack. He told them to hide from their pursuer. Finally, after a truly exhausting ordeal, they were to drop the sack in such a way that the girl could witness a most vicious fight between Don Juan and the four women. Silvio Manuel told the women that this had to be utterly realistic. He armed them with sticks and instructed them to hit Don Juan convincingly before they were driven away. Of the women, Zoila was the one most easily carried away by hysteria. As soon as they began whacking Don Juan, she became possessed by her role and gave a chilling performance, striking Don Juan so hard that flesh was torn from his back and shoulders. For a moment it seemed that the kidnappers were going to win. Silvio Manuel had to come out of his hiding place and, pretending to be a passerby, remind them that it was only a ploy and that it was time to run away. Don Juan thus became Olinda's savior and protector. He told her that he could not take her back to her house himself because he had been injured, but he would send her back instead with his pious father. She helped him walk to his benefactor's house. Don Juan said that he did not have to pretend injury. He was bleeding profusely and barely made it to the door. When Olinda told his benefactor what had happened, his benefactor's desire to laugh was so excruciating he had to disguise it as weeping. Don Juan had his wounds bandaged and then went to bed. Olinda began to explain to Don Juan why her father was opposed to him, but she did not finish. Don Juan's benefactor came into the room and told her that it was evident to him, from observing her walk, that the kidnappers had injured her back. He offered to align it for her before it became critical. Olinda hesitated. Don Juan's benefactor reminded her that the kidnappers had not been playing, they had nearly killed his son, after all. That comment sufficed. She came to the benefactor's side and let him give her a sound blow on her shoulder blade. It made a cracking sound, and Olinda entered into a state of heightened awareness. He disclosed the rule to her, and just like Don Juan, she accepted it in full. There was no doubt, no hesitation. The Nagual woman and Don Juan found completeness and silence in each other's company. Don Juan said that the feeling they had for each other had nothing to do with affection or need. It was rather a shared physical sense that an ominous barrier had been broken within them, and they were one and the same being. Don Juan and his Nagual woman, as the rule prescribed, worked together for years to find the set of 4 female dreamers, who turned out to be Nolita, Zuleika, Cecilia, and Hermelinda, and the 3 couriers, Juantuma, Teresa, and Marta. Finding them was another occasion when the pragmatic nature of the rule was made clear to Don Juan. All of them were exactly what the rule said they were going to be. Their advent introduced a new cycle for everyone, Don Juan's benefactor and his party included. For Don Juan and his warriors, it meant a cycle of dreaming, and for his benefactor and his party, it meant a period of unequaled impeccability in their acts. His benefactor explained to Don Juan that when he was young and was first introduced to the idea of the rule as the means to freedom, he had been elated, transfixed with joy. Freedom to him was a reality around the corner. When he came to understand the nature of the rule as a map, his hopes and optimism were redoubled. Later on, sobriety took hold of his life. The older his benefactor got, the less chance he saw for his success and the success of his party. Finally, he became convinced that no matter what they did, the odds were too great against their tenuous human awareness ever flying free. He made peace with himself and his fate, and surrendered to failure. He told the eagle from his inner self that he was glad and proud to have nourished his awareness. The eagle was welcome to it. Don Juan told us that the same mood was shared by all the members of his benefactor's party. The freedom proposed in the rule was something they considered unattainable. They had caught glimpses of the annihilating force that the eagle is, and felt that they did not stand a chance against it. All of them had agreed, nevertheless, that they would live their lives impeccably for no other reason than to be impeccable. Don Juan said that his benefactor and his party, in spite of their feelings of inadequacy, or perhaps because of those feelings, did find their freedom. They did enter into the third attention not as a group, however, but one by one. The fact that they found the passageway was the final corroboration of the truth contained in the rule. The last one to leave the world of everyday life awareness was his benefactor. He complied with the rule and took Don Juan's Nagual woman with him. As the two of them dissolved into total awareness, Don Juan and all his warriors were made to explode from within. He could find no other way of describing the feeling entailed in being forced to forget all they had witnessed of their benefactor's world. The one who never forgot was Silvio Manuel. It was he who engaged Don Juan in the backbreaking effort of bringing back together the members of their group, all of whom had been scattered. He then plunged them into the task of finding the totality of themselves. It took them years to accomplish both tasks. Don Juan had extensively discussed the topic of forgetting, but only in connection with their great difficulty in getting together again and starting over without their benefactor. He never told us exactly what it entailed to forget or to gain the totality of oneself. In that respect, he was true to his benefactor's teachings, only helping us to help ourselves. To this effect, he trained Lagorda and me to see together and was able to show us that, although human beings appear to us as luminous eggs, the egg-like shape is an external cocoon, a shell of luminosity that houses a most intriguing, haunting, mesmeric core, made up of concentric circles of yellowish luminosity, the color of a candle's flame. During our final session, he had us see people milling around a church. It was late afternoon, almost dark, yet the creatures inside their rigid, luminous cocoons radiated enough light to render everything around them crystal clear. The sight was wondrous. Don Juan explained that the egg-shaped shells which seemed so bright to us were indeed dull. The luminosity emanated from the brilliant core. The shell in fact dulled its radiance. Don Juan revealed to us that the shell must be broken in order to liberate that being. It must be broken from the inside at the right time, just as creatures that hatch out of eggs break their shells. If they fail to do so, they suffocate and die. As with creatures that hatch out of eggs, there is no way for a warrior to break the shell of his luminosity until the time is right. Don Juan told us that losing the human form was the only means of breaking that shell, the only means of liberating that haunting luminous core, the core of awareness which is the eagle's food. To break the shell means remembering the other self and arriving at the totality of oneself. Don Juan and his warriors did arrive at the totality of themselves and turned then to their last task, which was to find a new pair of double beings. Don Juan said that they thought it was going to be a simple matter, everything else had been relatively easy for them. They had no idea that the apparent effortlessness of their accomplishments as warriors was a consequence of their benefactor's mastery and personal power. Their quest for a new pair of double beings was fruitless. In all their searching, they never came across a double woman. They found several double men, but those double men were all well situated, busy, prolific, and so satisfied with their lives that it would have been useless to approach them. Those men felt that they did not need to find purpose in life. They thought they had already found it. Don Juan said that one day he realized that he and his group were getting old, and there seemed to be no hope of ever accomplishing their task. That was the first time they felt the sting of despair and impotence. Silvio Manuel insisted that they should resign themselves and live impeccably without hope of finding their freedom. It seemed plausible to Don Juan that this might indeed be the key to everything. In this respect, he found himself following in his benefactor's footsteps. He came to accept that an unconquerable pessimism overtakes a warrior at a certain point on his path. A sense of defeat, or perhaps more accurately, a sense of unworthiness, comes upon him almost unawares. Don Juan said that, before, he used to laugh at his benefactor's doubts and could not bring himself to believe that he worried in earnest. In spite of the protests and warnings of Silvio Manuel, Don Juan had thought it was all a giant ploy designed to teach them something. Since he could not believe that his benefactor's doubts were real, Neither could he believe that his benefactor's resolution to live impeccably without hope of freedom was genuine. When Don Juan finally grasped that his benefactor, in all seriousness, had resigned himself to fail, it also dawned on Don Juan that a warrior's resolution to live impeccably in spite of everything cannot be approached as a strategy to ensure success. Don Juan and his party proved this truth for themselves when they realized for a fact that the odds against them were astonishing. Don Juan said that at such moments a lifelong training takes over, and the warrior enters into a state of unsurpassed humility. When the true poverty of his human resources becomes undeniable, the warrior has no recourse but to step back and lower his head. Don Juan marveled that this realization seems to have no effect on the female warriors of a party. The disarray seems to leave them unfazed. He told us that he had noted this in his benefactor's party. The females were never as worried and morose about their fate as were the males. They seemed simply to acquiesce in the judgment of Don Juan's benefactor and followed him without showing signs of emotional wear and tear. If the women were ruffled at some level, they were indifferent to it. To be busy was all that counted for them. It was as if only the males had bid for freedom and felt the impact of a counter-bidding. In his own group, Don Juan observed the same contrast. The women readily agreed with him when he said that his resources were inadequate. He could only conclude that the women, although they never mentioned it, had never believed they had any resources to begin with. There was consequently no way they could feel disappointed or despondent at finding out they were impotent. They had known it all along. Don Juan told us that the reason the eagle demanded twice as many female warriors as males was precisely because females have an inherent balance which is lacking in males. At the crucial moment, it is the men who get hysterical and commit suicide if they judge that everything is lost. A woman may kill herself due to lack of direction and purpose, but not because of the failure of a system to which she happens to belong. After Don Juan and his party of warriors had given up hope, or rather, as Don Juan put it, after he and the male warriors had reached rock bottom, and the women had found suitable ways to humor them, Don Juan finally stumbled upon a double man he could approach. I was that double man. He said that since no one in his right mind is going to volunteer for such a preposterous project as a struggle for freedom, he had to follow his benefactor's teachings and, in true stalker's style, reel me in as he had reeled in the members of his own party. He needed to have me alone at a place where he could apply physical pressure to my body, and it was necessary that I go there of my own accord. He lured me into his house with great ease. As he said, securing the double man is never a great problem. The difficulty is to find one who is available. That first visit to his house was, from the point of view of my daily awareness, an uneventful session. Don Juan was charming and joked with me. He guided the conversation to the fatigue the body experiences after long drives, a subject that seemed thoroughly inconsequential to me as a student of anthropology. Then he made the casual comment that my back appeared to be out of alignment, and without another word put a hand on my chest and straightened me up and gave me a sound rap on the back. He caught me so unprepared that I blacked out. When I opened my eyes again, I felt as if he had broken my spine, but I knew that I was different. I was someone else and not the me I knew. From then on, whenever I saw him, he would make me shift from my right side awareness to my left, and then he would reveal the rule to me. Almost immediately after finding me, Don Juan encountered a double woman. He did not put me in touch with her through a scheme, as his benefactor had done with him, but devised a ploy, as effective and elaborate as any of his benefactors, by which he himself enticed and secured the double woman. He assumed this burden because he believed that it was the benefactor's duty to secure both double beings immediately upon finding them, and then to put them together as partners in an inconceivable enterprise. He told me that one day when he was living in Arizona, he had gone to a government office to fill out an application. The lady at the desk told him to take it to an employee in the adjacent section, and without looking she pointed to her left. Don Juan followed the direction of her outstretched arm and saw a double woman sitting at a desk. When he took his application to her, he realized that she was just a young girl. She told him that she had nothing to do with applications. Nevertheless, out of sympathy for a poor old Indian, she took the time to help him process it. Some legal documents were needed, documents which Don Juan had in his pocket, but he pretended total ignorance and helplessness. He made it seem that the bureaucratic organization was an enigma to him. It was not difficult at all to portray total mindlessness, Don Juan said. All he had to do was revert to what had once been his normal state of awareness. It was to his purpose to prolong his interaction with the girl for as long as he could. His mentor had told him, and he himself had verified it in his search, that double women are quite rare. His mentor had also warned him that they have inner resources that make them highly volatile. Don Juan was afraid that if he did not play his cards expertly, she would leave. He played on her sympathy to gain time. He created further delay by pretending that the legal documents were lost. Nearly every day he would bring in a different one to her. She would read it and regretfully tell him that it was not the right one. The girl was so moved by his sorry condition that she even volunteered to pay for a lawyer to draw him up an affidavit in lieu of the papers. After 3 months of this, Don Juan thought it was time to produce the documents. By then she had gotten used to him and almost expected to see him every day. Don Juan came one last time to express his thanks and say goodbye. He told her that he would have liked to bring her a gift to show his appreciation, but he did not have money even to eat. She was moved by his candor and took him to lunch. As they were eating, he mused that a gift does not necessarily have to be an object that one buys. It could be something that is only for the eyes of the beholder. Something to remember rather than to possess. She was intrigued by his words. Don Juan reminded her that she had expressed compassion for the Indians and their condition as paupers. He asked her if she would like to see the Indians in a different light, not as paupers but as artists. He told her that he knew an old man who was the last of his line of power dancers. He assured her that the man would dance for her at his request, and furthermore, he promised her that never in her life had she seen anything like it, nor would she ever again. It was something that only Indians witnessed. She was delighted at the idea. She picked him up after her work, and they headed for the hills where he told her the Indian lived. Don Juan took her to his own house. He made her stop the car quite a distance away, and they began to walk the rest of the way. Before they reached the house, he stopped and drew a line with his foot in the sandy, dry dirt. He told her that the line was a boundary and coaxed her to step across. The Nagual woman herself told me that up to that point, she had been very intrigued with the possibility of witnessing a genuine Indian dancer, But when the old Indian drew a line on the dirt and called it a boundary, she began to hesitate. Then she became outright alarmed when he told her that the boundary was for her alone, and that once she stepped over it, there was no way of returning. The Indian apparently saw her consternation and tried to put her at ease. He politely patted her on the arm and gave her his guarantee that no harm would come to her while he was around. The boundary could be explained, he told her, as a form of symbolic payment to the dancer, because he did not want money. Ritual was in lieu of money, and ritual required that she step over the boundary of her own accord. The old Indian gleefully stepped over the line and told her that to him all of it was sheer Indian nonsense, but that the dancer, who was watching them from inside the house, had to be humored if she wanted to see him dance. The Nagwal woman said that she suddenly became so afraid that she could not move to cross the line. The old Indian made an effort to persuade her, saying that stepping over that boundary was beneficial to the entire body. Crossing it had not only made him feel younger, it had actually made him younger, such power did that boundary have. To demonstrate his point, he crossed back again, and immediately his shoulders slouched, the corners of his mouth drooped, his eyes lost their shine. The Nagwal woman could not deny the differences the crossings had made. Don Juan recrossed the line a third time. He breathed deeply, expanding his chest, his movements brisk and bold. The Nagwal woman said that the thought crossed her mind that he might even make sexual advances. Her car was too far away to make a run for it. The only thing she could do was to tell herself that it was stupid to fear that old Indian. Then the old man made another appeal to her reason and to her sense of humor. In a conspiratorial tone, as if he were revealing a secret with some reluctance, he told her that he was just pretending to be young to please the dancer, and that if she did not help him by crossing the line, he was going to faint at any moment from the stress of walking without slouching. He walked back and forth across the line to show her the immense strain involved in his pantomime. The Nagwal woman said that his pleading eyes revealed the pain his old body was going through to mimic youth. She crossed the line to help him and be done with it. She wanted to go home. The moment she crossed the line, Don Juan took a prodigious jump and glided over the roof of the house. The Nagwal woman said that he flew like a huge boomerang. When he landed next to her, she fell on her back. Her fright was beyond anything she had ever experienced, but so was her excitement at having witnessed such a marvel. She did not even ask how he had accomplished such a magnificent feat. She wanted to run back to her car and head for home. The old man helped her up and apologized for having tricked her. In fact, he said, he himself was the dancer, and his flight over the house had been his dance. He asked her if she had paid attention to the direction of his flight. The Nagwal woman circled her hand counterclockwise. He patted her head paternally and told her that it was very auspicious that she had been attentive. Then he said that she may have injured her back in her fall, and that he could not just let her go without making sure she was all right. Boldly, he straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin and the back of her head, as if he were directing her to extend her spine. He then gave her a sound smack between her shoulder blades, literally knocking all the air out of her lungs. For a moment she was unable to breathe and she fainted. When she regained consciousness, she was inside his house. Her nose was bleeding, her ears were buzzing, her breathing was accelerated, and she could not focus her eyes. He instructed her to take deep breaths to a count of 8. The more she breathed, the clearer everything became. At one point, she told me, the whole room became incandescent. Everything glowed with an amber light. She became stupefied and could not breathe deeply anymore. The amber light by then was so thick it resembled fog. Then the fog turned into amber cobwebs. It finally dissipated, but the world remained uniformly amber for a while longer. Don Juan began to talk to her then. He took her outside the house and showed her that the world was divided into two halves. The left side was clear, but the right side was veiled in amber fog. He told her that it is monstrous to think that the world is understandable or that we ourselves are understandable. He said that what she was perceiving was an enigma, a mystery that one could only accept in humbleness and awe. He then revealed the rule to her. Her clarity of mind was so intense that she understood everything he said. The rule seemed to her appropriate and self-evident. He explained to her that the two sides of a human being are totally separate and that it takes great discipline and determination to break that seal and go from one side to the other. A double being has a great advantage. The condition of being double permits relatively easy movement between the compartments on the right side. The great disadvantage of double beings is that by virtue of having two compartments they are sedentary, conservative, afraid of change. Don Juan said to her that his intention had been to make her shift from her extreme right compartment to her more lucid, sharper left-right side. But instead, through some inexplicable quirk, his blow had sent her all across her doubleness, from her everyday extreme right side to her extreme left side. He tried 4 times to make her revert back to a normal state of awareness, but to no avail. His blows helped her, however, to turn her perception of the wall of fog on and off at will. Although he had not intended it, Don Juan had been right in saying that the line was a one-way boundary for her. Once she crossed it, just like Silvio Manuel, she never returned. When Don Juan put the Nagual woman and me face to face, neither of us had known of the other's existence, yet we instantly felt that we were familiar with one another. Don Juan knew from his own experience that the solace double beings feel in each other's company is indescribable and far too brief. He told us that we had been put together by forces incomprehensible to our reason, and that the only thing we did not have was time. Every minute might be the last, therefore, it had to be lived with the spirit. Once Don Juan had put us together, all that was left for him and his warriors to do was find 4 female stalkers, 3 male warriors, and 1 male courier to make up our party. To that end, Don Juan found Lydia, Josefina, La Gorda, Rosa, Benigno, Nestor, Pablito, and the courier Eligio. Each one of them was a replica and an undeveloped form of the members of Don Juan's own party. The not doings of Silvio Manuel. Don Juan and his warriors sat back to allow the Nagual woman and myself room to enact the rule that is, to nourish, enhance, and lead the 8 warriors to freedom. Everything seemed perfect, yet something was wrong. The first set of female warriors Don Juan had found were dreamers when they should have been stalkers. He did not know how to explain this anomaly. Anomaly deviation from the normal or common order or form or rule. He could only conclude that power had put those women in his path in a manner that made it impossible to refuse them. There was another striking anomaly that was even more baffling to Don Juan and his party. 3 of the women and the 3 male warriors were incapable of entering into a state of heightened awareness, despite Don Juan's titanic efforts. They were groggy, out of focus, and could not break the seal, the membrane that separates their two sides. They were nicknamed the drunkards because they staggered around without muscular coordination. The courier Eligio and Lagorda were the only ones with an extraordinary degree of awareness, especially Eligio, who was par with any of Don Juan's own people. The three girls clustered together and made an unshakable unit. So did the three men. Groups of three when the rule prescribes four were something ominous. The number 3 is a symbol of dynamics, change, movement, and above all, a symbol of revitalization. The rule was no longer serving as a map. And yet it was not conceivable that an error was involved. Don Juan and his warriors argued that power does not make mistakes. They pondered the question in their dreaming and seeing. They wondered whether they had perhaps been too hasty and simply had not seen that the three women and the three men were inept. Don Juan confided to me that he saw two relevant questions. One was the pragmatic problem of our presence among them. The other was the question of the rule's validity. Their benefactor had guided them to the certainty that the rule encompassed everything a warrior might be concerned with. He had not prepared them for the eventuality that the rule might prove to be inapplicable. Lagorda said that the women of Don Juan's party never had any problems with me. It was only the males who were at a loss. To the men, it was incomprehensible and unacceptable that the rule was incongruous in my case. The women, however, were confident that sooner or later the reason for my being there was going to be made clear. I had observed how the women kept themselves detached from the emotional turmoil, seeming to be completely unconcerned with the outcome. They seemed to know without any reasonable doubt that my case had to be somehow included in the rule. After all, I had definitely helped them by accepting my role. Thanks to the Nagual woman and myself, Don Juan and his party had completed their cycle and were almost free. The answer came to them at last through Silvio Manuel. His seeing revealed that the three little sisters and the Generos were not inept. It was rather that I was not the right Nagual for them. I was incapable of leading them because I had an unsuspected configuration that did not match the pattern laid down by the rule, a configuration which Don Juan as a seer had overlooked. My luminous body gave the appearance of having 4 compartments when in reality it had only 3. There was another rule for what they called a 3-pronged Nagual. I belonged to that other rule. Silvio Manuel said that I was like a bird hatched by the warmth and care of birds of a different species. All of them were still bound to help me, as I myself was bound to do anything for them. But I did not belong with them. Don Juan assumed responsibility for me because he had brought me into their midst, but my presence among them forced them all to exert themselves to the maximum, searching for 2 things: an explanation of what I was doing among them, and a solution to the problem of what to do about it. Silvio Manuel very quickly hit upon a way to dislodge me from their midst. He took over the task of directing the project, but since he did not have the patience or energy to deal with me personally, he commissioned Don Juan to do so as his surrogate. Silvio Manuel's goal was to prepare me for a moment when a courier bearing the rule pertinent to a 3-pronged Nagual would make himself or herself available to me. He said that it was not his role to reveal that portion of the rule. I had to wait, just as all the others had to wait, for the right time. There was still another serious problem that added more confusion. It had to do with Lagorda, and in the long run with me. Lagorda had been accepted into my party as a southerly woman. Don Juan and the rest of his seers had attested to it. She seemed to be in the same category with Cecilia, Delia, and the two female couriers. The similarities were undeniable. Then Lagorda lost all her superfluous weight and slimmed down to half her size. The change was so radical and profound that she became something else. She had gone unnoticed for a long time simply because all the other warriors were too preoccupied with my difficulties to pay any attention to her. Her change was so drastic, however, that they were forced to focus on her, and what they saw that she was not a southerly woman at all. The bulkiness of her body had misled their previous seeing. They remembered then that from the first moment she came into their midst, Lagorda could not really get along with Cecilia, Delia, and the other southerly women. She was, on the other hand, utterly charmed and at ease with Nolita and Florinda, because in fact she had always been like them. That meant that there were two northerly dreamers in my party, Lagorda and Rosa, a blatant discrepancy with the rule. Don Juan and his warriors were more than baffled. They understood everything that was happening as an omen, an indication that things had taken an unforeseeable turn. Since they could not accept the idea of human error overriding the rule, they assumed that they had been made to err by a superior command, for a reason which was difficult to discern but real. They pondered the question of what to do next, but before any of them came up with an answer, a true southerly woman, Doña Soledad, came into the picture with such a force that it was impossible for them to refuse her. She was congruous with the rule. She was a stalker. Her presence distracted us for a time. For a while it seemed as if she were going to pull us off to another plateau. She created vigorous movement. Florinda took her under her wing to instruct her in the art of stalking. But whatever good it did, it was not enough to remedy a strange loss of energy that I felt, a listlessness that seemed to be increasing. Then one day Silvio Manuel said that in his dreaming he had received a master plan. He was exhilarated and went off to discuss its details with Don Juan and the other warriors. The Nagual woman was included in their discussions, but I was not. This made me suspect that they did not want me to find out what Silvio Manuel had discovered about me. I confronted every one of them with my suspicions. They all laughed at me, except for the Nagual woman, who told me that I was right. Silvio Manuel's dreaming had revealed the reason for my presence among them, but I would have to surrender to my fate, which was not to know the nature of my task until I was ready for it. There was such finality in her tone that I could only accept without question everything she said. I think that if Don Juan or Silvio Manuel had told me the same thing, I would not have acquiesced so easily. She also said that she disagreed with Don Juan and the others. She thought I should be informed of the general purpose of their actions, if only to avoid unnecessary friction and rebelliousness. Silvio Manuel intended to prepare me for my task by taking me directly into the second attention. He planned a series of bold actions that would galvanize my awareness. In the presence of all the others, he told me that he was taking over my guidance, and that he was shifting me to his area of power, the night. The explanation he gave was that a number of not-doings had presented themselves to him in dreaming. They were designed for a team composed of Lagorda and myself as the doers, and the Nagual woman as the overseer. Silvio Manuel was awed by the Nagual woman, and had only words of admiration for her. He said that she was in a class by herself. She could perform on a par with him or any of the other warriors of his party. She did not have experience, but she could manipulate her attention in any way she needed. He confessed that her prowess was as great a mystery to him as was my presence among them, and that her sense of purpose and her conviction were so keen that I was no match for her. In fact, he asked Lagorda to give me special support, so I could withstand the Nagual woman's contact. For our first not doing, Silvio Manuel constructed a wooden crate big enough to house Lagorda and me if we sat back to back with our knees up. The crate had a lid made of lattice work to let in a flow of air. Lagorda and I were to climb inside it and sit in total darkness and total silence without falling asleep. He began by letting us enter the box for short periods. Then he increased the time as we got used to the procedure until we could spend the entire night inside it without moving or dozing off. The Nagual woman stayed with us to make sure that we would not change levels of awareness due to fatigue. Silvio Manuel said that our natural tendency under unusual conditions of stress is to shift from the heightened state of awareness to our normal one, and vice versa. The general effect of the not doing every time we performed it was to give us an unequaled sense of rest, which was a complete puzzle to me, since we never fell asleep during our night-long vigils. I attributed the sense of rest to the fact that we were in a state of heightened awareness, but Silvio Manuel said that the one had nothing to do with the other, that the sense of rest was the result of sitting with our knees up. The second not doing consisted of making us lie on the ground like curled up dogs, almost in the fetal position, resting on our left sides, our foreheads on our folded arms. Silvio Manuel insisted that we keep our eyes closed as long as possible, opening them only when he told us to shift positions and lie on our right sides. He told us that the purpose of this not doing was to allow our sense of hearing to separate from our sight. As before, he gradually increased the length of time until we could spend the entire night in auditory vigil. Silvio Manuel was then ready to move us to another area of activity. He explained that in the first two not doings we had broken a certain perceptual barrier while we were stuck to the ground. By way of analogy, he compared human beings to trees. We are like mobile trees. We are somehow rooted to the ground. Our roots are transportable, but that does not free us from the ground. He said that in order to establish balance we had to perform the third not doing while dangling in the air. If we succeeded in channeling our intent while we were suspended from a tree inside a leather harness, we would make a triangle with our intent, a triangle whose base was on the ground and its vertex in the air. Silvio Manuel thought that we had gathered our attention with the first two not doings to the point that we could perform the third perfectly from the beginning. One night he suspended Lagorda and me in two separate harnesses like strap chairs. We sat in them and he lifted us with a pulley to the highest large branches of a tall tree. He wanted us to pay attention to the awareness of the tree, which he said would give us signals, since we were its guests. He made the Nagual woman stay on the ground and call our names from time to time during the entire night. While we were suspended from the tree in the innumerable times we performed this not doing, we experienced a glorious flood of physical sensations like mild charges of electrical impulses. During the first 3 or 4 attempts, it had been as if the tree were protesting our intrusion. Then after that, the impulses became signals of peace and balance. Silvio Manuel told us that the awareness of a tree draws its nourishment from the depths of the earth, while the awareness of mobile creatures draws it from the surface. There is no sense of strife in a tree, whereas moving beings are filled to the brim with it. His contention was that perception suffers a profound jolt when we are placed in states of quietude and darkness. Our hearing takes the lead then, and the signals from all the living and existing entities around us can be detected not with our hearing only, but with a combination of the auditory and visual senses, in that order. He said that in darkness, especially while one is suspended, the eyes become subsidiary to the ears. He was absolutely right, as Lagorda and I discovered. Through the exercise of the third not doing, Silvio Manuel gave a new dimension to our perception of the world around us. He then told Lagorda and me that the next set of 3 not doings would be intrinsically different and more complex. These had to do with learning to handle the other world. It was mandatory to maximize their effect by moving our time of action to the evening or pre-dawn twilight. He told us that the first not doing of the second set had 2 stages. In stage 1 we had to bring ourselves to our keenest state of heightened awareness, so as to detect the wall of fog. Once that was done, stage 2 consisted of making that wall stop rotating in order to venture into the world between the parallel lines. He warned us that what he was aiming at was to place us directly into the second attention, without any intellectual preparation. He wanted us to learn its intricacies without rationally understanding what we were doing. His contention was that a magical deer or a magical coyote handles the second attention without having any intellect. Through the forced practice of journeying behind the wall of fog, we were going to undergo, sooner or later, a permanent alteration in our total being, an alteration that would make us accept that the world between the parallel lines is real because it is part of the total world, just as our luminous body is part of our total being. Silvio Manuel also said that he was using Lagorda and me to probe into the possibility that we could someday help the other apprentices by ushering them into the other world, in which case they could accompany the Don Juan Matus and his party in their definitive journey. He reasoned that since the Nagual woman had to leave this world with the Don Juan Matus and his warriors, the apprentices had to follow her because she was their only leader in the absence of an Nagual man. He assured us that she was counting on us, that this was the reason she was supervising our work. Silvio Manuel had Lagorda and me sit down on the ground in the area in back of his house, where we had performed all the not doings. We did not need Don Juan's aid to enter into our keenest state of awareness. Almost immediately I saw the wall of fog. Lagorda did too. Yet no matter how we tried, we could not stop its rotation. Every time I moved my head, the wall moved with it. The Nagual woman was able to stop it and go through it by herself, but for all her efforts, she could not take the 2 of us with her. Finally, Don Juan and Silvio Manuel had to stop the wall for us and physically push us through it. The sensation I had upon entering into that wall of fog was that my body was being twisted like the braids of a rope. On the other side, there was the horrible desolate plain with small round sand dunes. There were very low yellow clouds around us, but no sky or horizon. Banks of pale yellow vapor impaired visibility. It was very difficult to walk. The pressure seemed much greater than what my body was used to. Lagorda and I walked aimlessly, but the Nagual woman seemed to know where she was going. The further we went away from the wall, the darker it got and the more difficult it was to move. Lagorda and I could no longer walk erect. We had to crawl. I lost my strength, and so did Lagorda. The Nagwal woman had to drag us back to the wall and out of there. We repeated our journey innumerable times. At first we were aided by Don Juan and Silvio Manuel in stopping the wall of fog, but then Lagorda and I became almost as proficient as the Nagwal woman. We learned to stop the rotation of that wall. It happened quite naturally to us. In my case, on one occasion I realized that my intent was the key, a special aspect of my intent because it was not my volition as I know it. It was an intense desire that was focused on the midpoint of my body. It was a peculiar nervousness that made me shudder, and then it turned into a force that did not really stop the wall, but made some part of my body turn involuntarily 90 degrees to the right. The result was that for an instant I had 2 points of view. I was looking at the world divided in two by the wall of fog, and at the same time I was staring directly at a bank of yellowish vapor. The latter view gained predominance, and something pulled me into the fog and beyond it. Another thing that we learned was to regard that place as real. Our journeys acquired for us the factuality of an excursion into the mountains, or a sea voyage in a sailboat. The deserted plain with sand dune-like mounds was as real to us as any part of the world. Lagorda and I had the rational feeling that the three of us spent an eternity in the world between the parallel lines, yet we were unable to remember what exactly transpired there. We could only remember the terrifying moments when we would have to leave it to return to the world of everyday life. It was always a moment of tremendous anguish and insecurity. Don Juan and all his warriors followed our endeavors with great curiosity, but the one who was strangely absent from all our activities was Eligio. Although he was himself a peerless warrior comparable to the warriors of Don Juan's own party, he never took part in our struggle, nor did he help us in any way. Lagorda said that Eligio had succeeded in attaching himself to Emilito, and thus directly to the Nagwal Juan Matus. He was never part of our problem because he could go into the second attention at the drop of a hat. To him, journeying into the confines of the second attention was as easy as snapping his fingers. Lagorda reminded me of the day when Eligio's unusual talents allowed him to find out that I was not their man. Long before anyone else had even an inkling of the truth, I had been sitting on the back porch of Vicente's house in northern Mexico when Emilito and Eligio suddenly showed up. Everyone took for granted that Emilito had to disappear for long periods of time. When he would show up again, everyone also took for granted that he had returned from a voyage. No one asked him any questions. He would report his findings first to Don Juan, and then to whoever wanted to hear them. On that day it was as if Emilito and Eligio had just come into the house through the back door. Emilito was ebullient as ever. Eligio was his usual quiet somber self. I had always thought that when I saw both of them together, that Emilito's exquisite personality overwhelmed Eligio and made him even more sullen. Emilito went inside looking for Don Juan, and Eligio opened up to me. He smiled and came to my side. He put his arm around my shoulders and placing his mouth to my ear, whispered that he had broken the seal of the parallel lines, and he could go into something he said Emilito had called glory. Eligio went on to explain certain things about glory which I was unable to comprehend. It was as if my mind could only focus on the periphery of that event. After explaining it to me, Eligio took me by the hand and made me stand in the middle of the patio, looking at the sky with my chin slightly turned up. He was to my right, standing with me in the same position. He told me to let go and fall backwards, pulled by the heaviness of the very top of my head. Something grabbed me from behind and pulled me down. There was an abyss behind me. I fell into it. And then suddenly I was on the desolate plain with dune-like mounts. Eligio urged me to follow him. He told me that the edge of glory was over the hills. I walked with him until I could not move any longer. He ran ahead of me with no effort at all, as if he were made of air. He stood on top of a large mound and pointed beyond. He ran back to me and begged me to crawl up that hill, which he told me was the edge of glory. It was perhaps only 100 feet away from me, but I could not move another inch. He tried to drag me up the hill, but he could not budge me. My weight seemed to have increased 100-fold. Eligio finally had to summon Don Juan and his party. Cecilia lifted me up on her shoulders and carried me out. Lagorda added that Emilito had put Eligio up to it. Emilito was proceeding according to the rule. My courier had journeyed into glory. It was mandatory that he show it to me. I could recollect the eagerness in Eligio's face and the fervor with which he urged me to make one last effort to witness glory. I could also recollect his sadness and disappointment when I failed. He never spoke to me again. Lagorda and I had been so involved in our journeys behind a wall of fog that we had forgotten that we were due for the next not doing of the series with Silvio Manuel. He told us that it could be devastating, and that it consisted of crossing the parallel lines with the three little sisters and the three generos directly into the entrance to the world of total awareness. He did not include Doña Soledad because his not doings were only for dreamers, and she was a stalker. Silvio Manuel added that he expected us to become familiar with the third attention by placing ourselves at the foot of the eagle over and over. He prepared us for the jolt. He explained that a warrior's journeys into the desolate sand dunes is a preparatory step for the real crossing of boundaries. To venture behind the wall of fog while one is in a state of heightened awareness or while one is doing dreaming entails only a very small portion of our total awareness, while to cross bodily into the other world entails engaging our total being. Silvio Manuel had conceived the idea of using the bridge as the symbol of a true crossing. He reasoned that the bridge was adjacent to a power spot, and power spots are cracks, passageways into the other world. He thought that it was possible that Lagorda and I had acquired enough strength to withstand a glimpse of the eagle. He announced that it was my personal duty to round up the three women and the three men and help them get into their keenest states of awareness. It was the least I could do for them, since I had perhaps been instrumental in destroying their chances for freedom. He moved our time of action to the hour just before dawn, or the morning twilight. I dutifully attempted to make them shift awareness, as Don Juan did to me. Since I had no idea how to manipulate their bodies or what I really had to do with them, I ended up beating them on the back. After several grueling attempts on my part, Don Juan finally intervened. He got them as ready as they could possibly be and handed them over to me to herd like cattle onto the bridge. My task was to take them one by one across that bridge. The power spot was on the south side, a very auspicious omen. Silvio Manuel planned to cross first, wait for me to deliver them to him, and then usher us as a group into the unknown. Silvio Manuel walked across, followed by Eligio, who did not even glance at me. I held the 6 apprentices in a tight group on the north side of the bridge. They were terrified. They got loose from my grip and began to run in different directions. I caught the 3 women one by one and succeeded in delivering them to Silvio Manuel. He held them at the entrance of the crack between the worlds. The 3 men were too fast for me. I was too tired to run after them. I looked at Don Juan across the bridge for guidance. He and the rest of his party and the Nagual woman were clustered together looking at me. They had coaxed me with gestures to run after the women or the men, laughing at my fumbling attempts. Don Juan made a gesture with his head to disregard the 3 men and to cross over to Silvio Manuel with Lagorda. We crossed. Silvio Manuel and Eligio seemed to be holding the sides of a vertical slit the size of a man. The women ran and hid behind Lagorda. Silvio Manuel urged all of us to step inside the opening. I obeyed him. The women did not. Beyond that entrance there was nothing. Yet it was filled to the brim with something that was nothing. My eyes were open. All my senses were alert. I strained myself trying to see in front of me. But there was nothing in front of me. Or if there was something there, I could not grasp it. My senses did not have the compartmentalization I have learned to regard as meaningful. Everything came to me at once, or rather nothingness came to me to a degree I had never experienced before or after. I felt that my body was being torn apart. A force from within myself was pushing outward. I was bursting, and not in a figurative way. Suddenly I felt a human hand snatching me out of there before I disintegrated. The Nagual woman had crossed over and saved me. Eligio had not been able to move because he was holding the opening, and Silvio Manuel had the 4 women by their hair, 2 in each hand, ready to hurl them in. I assume that the whole event must have taken at least a quarter of an hour to unfold, but at the time it never occurred to me to worry about people around the bridge. Time seemed to have been somehow suspended, just as it became suspended years later when the apprentices and I returned to the bridge on our way to Mexico City. Silvio Manuel said that although the attempt had seemed to be a failure, it was a total success. The 4 women did see the aperture and threw it into the other world, and what I experienced in there was a true sense of death. There is nothing gorgeous or peaceful about death, he said, because the real terror begins upon dying. With that incalculable force you felt in there, the eagle will squeeze out of you every flicker of awareness you have ever had. Silvio Manuel prepared Lagorda and me for another attempt. He explained that power spots were actual holes in a sort of canopy that prevents the world from losing its shape. A power spot could be utilized as long as one has gathered enough strength in the second attention. He told us that the key to withstanding the eagle's presence was the potency of one's intent. Without intent there was nothing. He said to me that, since I was the only one who had stepped into the other world, what had nearly killed me was my incapacity to change my intent. He was confident, however, that with forced practice all of us would get to elongate our intent. He could not explain, however, what intent was. He joked that only the Nagual Juan Matus could explain it, but that he was not around. Unfortunately, our next attempt did not take place because I became depleted of energy. It was a swift and devastating loss of vitality. I was suddenly so weak that I passed out in Silvio Manuel's house. I asked Lagorda whether she knew what happened next. I myself had no idea. Lagorda said that Silvio Manuel told everyone that the eagle had dislodged me from their group, and that finally I was ready for them to prepare me to carry out the designs of my fate. His plan was to take me to the world between the parallel lines while I was unconscious, and let that world draw out all the remaining and useless energy from my body. His idea was sound in the judgment of all his companions, because the rule says that one could only enter in there with awareness. To enter without it brings death, since without consciousness the life force is exhausted by the physical pressure of that world. Lagorda added that they did not take her with me. But the Nagual Juan Matus had told her that once I was empty of vital energy, practically dead, all of them took turns in blowing new energy into my body. In that world, anybody who has life force can give it to others by blowing on them. They put their breath in all the spots where there is a storage point. Silvio Manuel blew first, then the Nagual woman. The remaining part of me was made up of all the members of the Nagual Juan Matus party. After they had blown their energy into me, the Nagual woman brought me out of the fog to Silvio Manuel's house. She laid me on the ground with my head toward the southeast. Lagorda said that I looked as if I were dead. She and the Generos and the three little sisters were there. The Nagual woman explained to them that I was ill, but that I was going to come back someday to help them find their freedom, because I would not be free myself until I did that. Silvio Manuel then gave me his breath and brought me back to life. That was why she and the little sisters remembered that he was my master. He carried me to my bed and let me sleep, as if nothing had happened. After I woke up I left and did not return. And then Lagorda forgot because no one ever pushed her into the left side again. She went to live in the town where I later found her with the others. The Nagual Juan and Genero had set up two different households. Genero took care of the men, and the Nagual Juan Matus looked after the women. I had gone to sleep feeling depressed, feeble. When I woke up I was in perfect control of myself, ebullient, filled with extraordinary and unfamiliar energy. My well-being was marred only by Don Juan's telling me that I had to leave Lagorda and strive alone to perfect my attention until one day when I would be able to return to help her. He also told me not to fret or get discouraged, for the carrier of the rule would eventually make himself or herself known to me in order to reveal my true task. Afterward I did not see Don Juan for a very long time. When I came back, he kept on making me shift from the right to the left side awareness for two purposes. First, so I could continue my relationship with his warriors and the Nagual woman, and second, so he could put me under the direct supervision of Zuleika, with whom I had a steady interaction throughout the remaining years of my association with Don Juan. He told me that the reason he had to entrust me to Zuleika was because according to Silvio Manuel's master plan, there were to be two kinds of instruction for me, one for the right side and one for the left. The right side instruction pertained to the state of normal consciousness and had to do with leading me to the rational conviction that there is another type of awareness concealed in human beings. Don Juan was in charge of this instruction. The left side instruction had been assigned to Zuleika. It was related to the state of heightened awareness and had to do exclusively with the handling of the second attention. Thus every time I went to Mexico I would spend half of my time with Zuleika and the other half with Don Juan. The intricacies of dreaming. Don Juan began the task of ushering me into the second attention by telling me that I had already had a great deal of experience in entering into it. Silvio Manuel had taken me to the very entrance. The flaw had been that I had not been given the appropriate rationales. Male warriors must be given serious reasons before they safely venture into the unknown. Female warriors are not subject to this and can go without any hesitation, providing that they have total confidence in whoever is leading them. He told me that I had to start by learning first the intricacies of dreaming. He then put me under Zuleika's supervision. He admonished me to be impeccable and practice meticulously whatever I learned, and above all, to be careful and deliberate in my actions, so as not to exhaust my life force in vain. He said that the prerequisite for entrance into any of the 3 stages of attention is the possession of life force, because without it warriors cannot have direction and purpose. He explained that upon dying our awareness also enters into the 3rd attention, but only for an instant as a purging action just before the eagle devours it. Lagorda said that the Nagual Juan made every one of the apprentices learn dreaming. She thought that all of them were given this task at the same time I was. Their instruction was also divided into right and left. She said that the Nagual and Genero provided the instruction for the state of normal awareness. When they judged that the apprentices were ready, the Nagual made them shift into a state of heightened awareness and left them with their respective counterparts. Vicente taught Nestor, Silvio Manuel taught Benigno, Genero taught Pablito. Lydia was taught by Hermelinda, and Rosa by Nolita. Lagorda added that Josefina and she were put under the care of Zuleika in order to learn together the finer points of dreaming, so they would be able to come to my aid someday. Moreover, Lagorda deduced on her own that the men were also taken to Florinda to be taught stalking. The proof of this was their drastic change of behavior. She claimed that she knew, before she remembered anything, that she had been taught the principles of stalking, but in a very superficial manner. She had not been made to practice. The men were given practical knowledge and tasks. Their behavioral change was the proof. They became light-hearted and jovial. They enjoyed their lives, while she and the other women, because of their dreaming, became progressively more somber and morose. Lagorda believed that the men were unable to remember their instruction when I asked them to reveal their stalking knowledge to me, because they practiced it without knowing what they were doing. Their training was revealed, however, in their dealings with people. They were consummate artists in bending people to their wishes. Through their stalking practice, the men had even learned controlled folly. For example, they carried on as if Soledad were Pablito's mother. To any onlooker, it would seem that they were mother and son pitted against each other when in reality they were acting out a part. They convinced everybody. Sometimes Pablito would give such a performance that he would even convince himself. Lagorda confessed that all of the apprentices were more than baffled by my behavior after I returned to Mexico following the departure of Don Juan and his warriors. The apprentices did not know whether I was insane or was myself a master of controlled folly. I gave all the outward indications that I believed their masquerade. Soledad told them not to be fooled because I was indeed insane. I appeared to be in control, but I was so completely aberrated that I could not behave like an Nagual. She engaged every one of the women in delivering a deadly blow to me. She told them that I had requested it myself at one time when I had been in control of my faculties. Lagorta said that it took her several years under Zuleika's guidance to learn dreaming. When the Nagual Juan Matus had judged that she was proficient, he finally took her to her true counterpart, Nalita. It was Nalita who showed her how to behave in the world. She groomed her not only to be at ease in Western clothes, but to have good taste. Thus when she put on her city clothes in Oaxaca and amazed me with her charm and poise, she was already experienced in that transformation. Zuleika was very effective as my guide into the second attention. She insisted that our interaction take place only at night and in total darkness. For me, Zuleika was only a voice in the dark, a voice that started every contact we had by telling me to focus my attention on her words and nothing else. Her voice was the woman's voice that Lagorta thought she had heard in dreaming. Zuleika told me that if dreaming is going to be done indoors, it is best to do it in total darkness, while lying down or sitting up on a narrow bed, or better yet, while sitting inside a coffin-like crib. She thought that outdoors, dreaming should be done in the protection of a cave, in the sandy areas of water holes, or sitting against a rock in the mountains, never on the flat floor of a valley, or next to rivers, or lakes, or the sea, because flat areas as well as water were antithetical, sharply contrasted in character or purpose to the second attention. Every one of my sessions with her was imbued with mysterious overtones. She explained that the surest way to make a direct hit on the second attention is through ritual acts, monotonous chanting, intricate repetitious movements. Her teachings were not about the preliminaries of dreaming which had already been taught to me by Don Juan. Her assumption was that whoever came to her already knew how to do dreaming, so she dealt exclusively with esoteric points of the left side awareness. Zuleika's instructions began one day when Don Juan took me to her house. We got there late in the afternoon. The place seemed to be deserted, but the front door opened as we approached. I expected Zoila or Marta to show up, but no one was at the entrance. I felt that whoever had opened the door for us had also moved out of our way very quickly. Don Juan took me inside to the patio and made me sit on a crate that had a cushion and had been turned into a bench. The seat on the crate was bumpy, hard, and very uncomfortable. I ran my hand underneath the thin cushion and found sharp-edged rocks. Don Juan said that my situation was unconventional because I had to learn the fine points of dreaming in a hurry. Sitting on a hard surface was a prop to keep my body from feeling it was in a normal sitting situation. Just a few minutes before arriving at the house, Don Juan had made me change levels of awareness. He said that Zuleika's instruction had to be conducted in that state in order for me to have the speed that I needed. He admonished me to abandon myself and trust Zuleika implicitly. He then commanded me to focus my gaze with all the concentration I was capable of and memorize every detail of the patio that was within my field of vision. He insisted that I had to memorize the detail as much as the feeling of sitting there. He repeated his instructions to make sure that I had understood. Then he left. It quickly got very dark, and sitting there I started to fret. I had not had enough time to concentrate on the detail of the patio. I heard a rustling sound just behind me, and then Zuleika's voice jolted me. In a forceful whisper she told me to get up and follow her. I automatically obeyed her. I could not see her face, she was only a dark shape walking 2 steps ahead of me. She led me to an alcove in the darkest hall in her house. Although my eyes were used to the darkness, I was still unable to see a thing. I stumbled on something and she commanded me to sit down inside a narrow crib and support my lower back with something I thought was a hard cushion. I next felt that she had backed up a few steps behind me, a thing which baffled me completely because I thought that my back was only a few inches from the wall. Speaking from behind me, she ordered me in a soft voice to focus my attention on her words and let them guide me. She told me to keep my eyes open and fixed on a point right in front of me at my eye level, and that this point was going to turn from darkness to a bright and pleasing orange-red. Zuleika spoke very softly with an even intonation. I heard every word she said. The darkness around me seemed to have effectively cut off any distracting external stimuli. I heard Zuleika's words in a vacuum, and then I realized that the silence in that hall was matched by the silence inside me. Zuleika explained that a dreamer must start from a point of color. Intense light or unmitigated darkness are useless to a dreamer in the initial onslaught. Colors such as purple or light green or rich yellow are, on the other hand, stupendous starting points. She preferred, however, orange-red, because through experience it had proven to be the one that gave her the greatest sensation of rest. She assured me that once I had succeeded in entering into the orange-red color, I would have rallied my second attention permanently, providing that I could be aware of the sequence of physical events. It took me several sessions with Zuleika's voice to realize with my body what she wanted me to do. The advantage of being in a state of heightened awareness was that I could follow my transition from a state of vigil to a state of dreaming. Under normal conditions that transition is blurred, but under those special circumstances I actually felt in the course of one session how my second attention took over the controls. The first step was an unusual difficulty in breathing. It was not a difficulty in inhaling or exhaling. I was not short of breath, rather, my breathing changed rhythm all of a sudden. My diaphragm began to contract, and it forced my midsection to move in and out with great speed. The result was the fastest short breaths I had ever taken. I breathed in the lower part of my lungs and felt a great pressure in my intestines. I tried unsuccessfully to break the spasms of my diaphragm. The harder I tried, the more painful it got. Zuleika ordered me to let my body do whatever was necessary and to forget about directing or controlling it. I wanted to obey her, but I did not know how. The spasms, which must have lasted 10 to 15 minutes, subsided as suddenly as they had appeared and were followed by another strange, shocking sensation. I felt at first as a most peculiar itch, a physical feeling which was not pleasing or displeasing. It was something like a nervous tremor. It became very intense to the point of forcing me to focus my attention on it in order to determine where in my body it was happening. I was stunned by the realization that it was not taking place anywhere in my physical body, but outside of it, and yet I still felt it. I disregarded Zuleika's order to enter into a patch of coloration that was forming right at my eye level and gave myself fully to the exploration of that strange sensation outside me. Zuleika must have seen what I was going through. She suddenly began to explain that the second attention belongs to the luminous body, just as the first attention belongs to the physical body. She said that the point where the second attention assembles itself was situated right where Juan Tuma had described it the first time we met, approximately 1.5 feet in front of the midpoint between the stomach and the belly button, and 4 inches to the right. Zuleika ordered me to massage that place, to manipulate it by moving the fingers of both my hands right on that point, as if I were playing a harp. She assured me that sooner or later I would end up feeling my fingers going through something as thick as water, and that finally I would feel my luminous shell. I then had another eerie sensation. I was falling asleep and yet I was conscious. There was a buzzing in my ears, which reminded me of the sound of a bull roar. Next I felt a force rolling me over on my left side without waking me up. I was rolled very tightly, like a cigar, and was tucked into the itching depression. My awareness remained suspended there, incapable of waking up, but so tightly rolled on itself that I could not fall asleep either. I heard Zuleika's voice telling me to look around. I could not open my eyes, but my tactile sense told me that I was in a ditch, lying on my back. I felt comfortable and secure. There was such a tightness to my body, such a compactness, that I did not ever want to get up. Zuleika's voice ordered me to stand up and open my eyes. I could not do it. She said that I had to will my movements, that it was no longer a matter of contracting my muscles to get up. I thought that she was annoyed at my slowness. I realized then that I was fully conscious, perhaps more conscious than I had ever been in my entire life. I could think rationally and yet I seemed to be sound asleep. The thought occurred to me that Zuleika had put me in a state of deep hypnosis. It bothered me for an instant, then it did not matter. I abandoned myself to the feeling of being suspended, floating free. I could not hear anything else she said. It was either that she had stopped talking to me or that I had shut off the sound of her voice. I did not want to leave that haven. I had never been so peaceful and complete. I lay there unwilling to get up or to change anything. I could feel the rhythm of my breathing. Suddenly I woke up. In my next session with Zuleika, she told me that I had succeeded in making a dent in my luminosity all by myself, and that making a dent meant bringing a distant point in my luminous shell closer to my physical body, therefore closer to control. She asserted repeatedly that from the moment the body learns to make that dent, it is easier to enter into dreaming. I agreed with her. I had acquired a strange impulse, a sensation that my body had instantly learned to reproduce. It was a mixture of feeling at ease, secure, dormant, suspended without tactile sense, and at the same time fully awake, aware of everything. Lagorda said that the Don Juan Matus had struggled for years to create that dent in her and all three little sisters, and in the Generos as well, so as to give them the permanent ability to focus their second attention. He had told her that ordinarily the dent is created on the spur of the moment by the dreamer when it is needed. Then the luminous shell changes back to its original shape. But in the apprentices' case, since they did not have an Agwal leader, the depression was created from the outside and was a permanent feature of their luminous bodies, a great help, but also a hindrance. It made all of them vulnerable and moody. I remembered then that once I had seen and kicked a depression in the luminous shells of Lydia and Rosa. I thought that the dent was at the height of the upper portion of the outside of their right thigh, or perhaps just at the crest of their hip bone. Lagorda explained that I had kicked them in the dent of their second attention, and that I had nearly killed them. Lagorda said that she and Josefina lived in Zuleika's house for several months. The Don Juan Matus had delivered them to her one day after making them shift levels of awareness. He did not tell them what they were going to do there, nor what to expect. He simply left them by themselves in the hall of her house and walked away. They sat there until it got dark. Zuleika then came to them. They never saw her. They only heard her voice as if she were talking to them from a point on the wall. Zuleika was very demanding from the moment she took over. She made them undress on the spot and ordered both of them to crawl inside thick fluffy cotton bags, some poncho-like garments that were lying on the floor. The garments covered them from neck to toes. Next, she ordered them to sit back to back on a mat in the same alcove where I myself used to sit. Zuleika told them that their task was to gaze at the darkness until it began to acquire a hue. After many sessions they indeed began to see colors in the darkness, at which time Zuleika made them sit side by side and gaze at the same spot. Lagorda said that Josefina learned very fast and that one night she dramatically entered into the patch of orange-red by swishing physically out of the poncho. Lagorda thought that either Josefina had reached out for the blotch of color or it had reached out for her. The result was that in one instant Josefina was gone from inside the poncho. Zuleika separated them from then on, and Lagorda started her slow, solitary learning. Lagorda's account made me remember that Zuleika had also made me crawl inside a fluffy garment. In fact, the commands she used to order me to crawl inside revealed to me the rationale for its use. She directed me to feel its fluffiness with my naked skin, especially with the skin of my calves. She repeated over and over that human beings have a superb center of perception on the outside of the calves, and that if the skin in that area could be made to relax or be soothed, the scope of our perception would be enhanced in ways that would be impossible to fathom rationally. The garment was very soft and warm, and it induced an extraordinary sensation of pleasurable relaxation in my legs. The nerves in my calves became highly stimulated. Lagorda reported the same sensation of physical pleasure. She went as far as to say that it was the power of that poncho that guided her to find the patch of orange-red color. She was so impressed with the garment that she made herself one by copying the original. Its effect was not the same, but it still provided her solace and well-being. She said that she and Josefina ended up spending all of their available time inside the ponchos that she had sewn for both of them. Lydia and Rosa had also been placed inside the garment, but they were never particularly fond of it. Neither was Lagorda explained Josefina's and her own attachment as a direct consequence of having been led to finding their dreaming color while they were inside the garment. She said that the reason for my indifference to it was the fact that I did not enter into the area of coloration at all, rather, the hue had come to me. She was right. Something else besides Zuleika's voice dictated the outcome of that preparatory phase. By all indications, Zuleika had led me through the same steps she had led Lagorda and Josefina. I had stared at the darkness throughout many sessions and was ready to visualize the spot of coloration. In fact, I witnessed its entire metamorphosis from plain darkness to a precisely outlined blotch of intense brightness. First I was swayed by the external itch. I then focused my attention upon it until I ended up entering into a state of restful vigil. It was then that I first became immersed in an orange-red coloration. After I had learned to remain suspended between sleep and vigil, Zuleika seemed to relax her pace. I even believed that she was not in any hurry to get me out of that state. She let me stay in it without interfering and never asked me about it, perhaps because her voice was only for commands and not for asking questions. We never really talked, at least not the way I talked with Don Juan. While I was in the state of restful vigil, I realized one time that it was useless for me to remain there, that no matter how pleasant it was, its limitations were blatant. I sensed then a tremor in my body and I opened my eyes, or rather my eyes became open by themselves. Zuleika was staring at me. I experienced a moment of bafflement. I thought I had woken up, and to be faced with Zuleika in the flesh was something I had not expected. I had gotten used to hearing only her voice. It also surprised me that it was no longer night. I looked around. We were not in Zuleika's house. Then the realization struck me that I was dreaming and I woke up. Zuleika started then on another facet of her teachings. She taught me how to move. She began her instruction by commanding me to place my awareness on the midpoint of my body. In my case, the midpoint is below the lower edge of my belly button. She told me to sweep the floor with it, that is, make a rocking motion with my belly, as if a broom were attached to it. Throughout countless sessions, I attempted to accomplish what her voice was urging me to do. She did not allow me to go into a state of restful vigil. It was her intention to guide me to elicit the perception of sweeping the floor with my midsection, while I remained in a waking state. She said that to be on the left side awareness was enough of an advantage to do well in the exercise. One day, for no reason I could think of, I succeeded in having a vague feeling in the area of my stomach. It was not something defined, and when I focused my attention on it, I realized that it was a prickling sensation inside the cavity of my body, not quite in my stomach area but above it. The closer I examined it, the more details I noticed. The vagueness of the sensation soon turned into a certainty. There was a strange connection of nervousness, a prickling sensation between my solar plexus and my right calf. As the sensation became more acute, I involuntarily brought my right thigh up to my chest. Thus the 2 points were as close to each other as my anatomy permitted. I shivered for a moment with an unusual nervousness, and then I clearly felt that I was sweeping the floor with my midsection. It was a tactile sensation that happened over and over every time I rocked my body in my sitting position. In my next session, Zuleika allowed me to enter into a state of restful vigil. But this time that state was not quite as it had been before. There seemed to be a sort of control in me that curtailed my enjoying it freely as I had done in the past, a control that also made me focus on the steps I had taken to get into it. First, I noticed the itch on the point of the second attention in my luminous shell. I massaged that point by moving my fingers on it, as if I were playing a harp, and the point sunk towards my stomach. I felt it almost on my skin. I experienced a prickling sensation on the outside of my right calf. It was a mixture of pleasure and pain. The sensation radiated to my whole leg and then to my lower back. I felt that my buttocks were shaking. My entire body was transfixed by a nervous ripple. I thought that my body had been caught upside down in a net. My forehead and my toes seemed to be touching. I was like a closed U shape. Then I felt as if I were being folded in two and rolled inside a sheet. My nervous spasms were what made the sheet roll into itself, with me in the center. When the rolling ended, I could not sense my body anymore. I was only an amorphous awareness, a nervous spasm wrapped in itself. That awareness came to rest inside a ditch, inside a depression of itself. I understood then the impossibility of describing what takes place in dreaming. Zuleika said that the right and left side awareness are wrapped up together. Both of them come to rest in one single bundle in the dent, the depressed center of the second attention. To do dreaming, one needs to manipulate both the luminous body and the physical body. First, the center of assembling for the second attention has to be made accessible by being pushed in from the outside by someone else, or sucked in from within by the dreamer. Second, in order to dislodge the first attention, the centers of the physical body located in the midsection and the calves, especially the right one, have to be stimulated and placed as close to one another as possible until they seem to join. Then the sensation of being bundled takes place, and automatically the second attention takes over. Zuleika's explanation, given in commands, was the most cogent way of describing what takes place, because none of the sensory experiences involved in dreaming are part of our normal inventory of sensory data. All of them were baffling to me. The sensation of an itch, a tingling outside myself, was localized, and because of that, the turmoil of my body upon feeling it was minimal. The sensation of being rolled on myself, on the other hand, was by far the most disquieting. It included a range of sensations that left my body in a state of shock. I was convinced that at one point my toes were touching my forehead, which is a position I am not able to attain, and yet I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that I was inside a net hanging upside down in a pear shape with my toes right against my forehead. On a physical plane, I was sitting down and my thighs were against my chest. Zuleika also said that the feeling of being rolled up like a cigar and placed inside the dent of the second attention was the result of merging my right and left awareness into a single awareness, in which the order of predominance has been switched and the left has gained supremacy. She challenged me to be attentive enough to catch the reversal motion, the two attentions again becoming what they normally are with the right holding the reins. I never caught the feelings involved, but her challenge obsessed me to the point that I became trapped in deadly vacillations in my effort to watch everything. She had to withdraw her challenge by ordering me to stop my scrutinies, for I had other things to do. Zuleika said that first of all I had to perfect my command of moving at will. She began her instruction by directing me time and time again to open my eyes, while I was in a state of restful vigil. It took a great deal of effort for me to do it. One time my eyes opened suddenly and I saw Zuleika looming over me. I was lying down, but I could not determine where. The light was extremely bright, as if I were just underneath a powerful electric bulb, but the light was not shining directly on my eyes. I could see Zuleika without any effort. She ordered me to stand up by willing my movement. She said that I had to push myself up with my midsection, that I had 3 thick tentacles there which I could use as crutches to lift up my whole body. I tried every conceivable way to get up. I failed. I had a sensation of despair and physical anguish reminiscent of nightmares I used to have as a child, in which I was unable to wake up, and yet I was fully awake, desperately trying to scream. Zuleika finally spoke to me. She said that I had to follow a certain sequence, and that it was wasteful and downright dumb of me to fret and get agitated, as if I were dealing with the world of everyday life. Fretting was proper only in the first attention. The second attention was calmness itself. She wanted me to repeat the sensation I had had of sweeping the floor with my midsection. I thought that in order to repeat it I would have to be sitting. Without any deliberation on my part, I sat up and adopted the position I had used when my body first elicited that sensation. Something in me rocked, and suddenly I was standing. I could not figure out what I had done to move. I thought that if I started all over again I could catch the sequence. As soon as I had that thought, I found myself lying down again. Upon standing up once more, I realized that there was no procedure involved, that in order to move I had to intend my moving at a very deep level. In other words, I had to be utterly convinced that I wanted to move, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that I had to be convinced that I needed to move. Once I had understood that principle, Zuleika made me practice every conceivable aspect of volitional movement. The more I practiced, the clearer it became for me that dreaming was in fact a rational state. Zuleika explained it. She said that in dreaming, the right side, the rational awareness, is wrapped up inside the left side awareness in order to give the dreamer a sense of sobriety and rationality, but that the influence of rationality has to be minimal and used only as an inhibiting mechanism to protect the dreamer from excesses and bizarre undertakings. The next step was learning to direct my dreaming body. From the first time I met Zuleika, Don Juan had proposed the task of gazing at the patio as I sat on the crate. I religiously engaged myself, sometimes for hours, in gazing at it. I was always alone in Zuleika's house. It seemed that on the days when I went there everyone was gone or was hiding. The silence and the solitude worked in my favor, and I succeeded in memorizing the details of that patio. Zuleika presented to me, accordingly, the task of opening my eyes from a state of restful vigil to see the patio. It took many sessions to accomplish it. At first I would open my eyes and I would see her, and she, with a jerk of her body, would make me bounce back like a ball into the state of restful vigil. On one of those bounces, I felt an intense tremor. Something that was located in my feet rattled its way up to my chest, and I coughed it up. The scene of the patio at night came out of me just as if it had emerged out of my bronchial tubes. It was something like the roar of an animal. I heard Zuleika's voice coming to me as a faint murmur. I could not understand what she was saying. I vaguely noticed that I was sitting on the crate. I wanted to get up, but I felt that I was not solid. It was as if a wind were blowing me away. Then I heard Zuleika's voice very clearly telling me not to move. I tried to remain motionless, but some force pulled me and I woke up in the alcove in the hall. Silvio Manuel was facing me. Typically, after every session of dreaming in Zuleika's house, Don Juan would be waiting for me in the pitch-black hall. He would take me out of the house and make me shift levels of awareness. This time Silvio Manuel was there. Without saying a word to me, he put me inside a harness and hoisted me up against the beams of the roof. He kept me there until midday, at which time Don Juan came and let me down. He explained that to be kept without touching the ground for a period of time tunes the body, and that it is essential to do this before embarking on a dangerous journey, such as the one I was about to undertake. It took many more sessions of dreaming for me to learn, at last, to open my eyes to see either Zuleika or to see the dark patio. I realized then that she herself had been dreaming all along. She had never been in person behind me in the alcove in the hall. I had been right the first night when I thought that my back was against the wall. Zuleika was merely a voice from dreaming. During one of the dreaming sessions, when I opened my eyes deliberately to see Zuleika, I was shocked to find Lagorda as well as Josefina looming over me together with Zuleika. The final facet of her teaching began then. Zuleika taught the three of us to journey with her. She said that our first attention was hooked to the emanations of the earth, while our second attention was hooked to the emanations of the universe. What she meant by that was that a dreamer by definition is outside the boundaries of the concerns of everyday life. As a traveler in dreaming then, Zuleika's last task with Lagorda, Josefina, and me was to tune our second attention to follow her around in her voyages into the unknown. In successive sessions, Zuleika's voice told me that her obsession was going to lead me to a rendezvous, that in matters of the second attention the dreamer's obsession serves as a guide, and that hers was focused on an actual place beyond this earth. From that place she was going to call me, and I had to use her voice as a line to pull myself. Nothing happened for 2 sessions. Zuleika's voice would become more and more faint as she spoke, and I worried that I was incapable of following her. She had not told me what to do. I also experienced an unusual heaviness. I could not break a binding force around me that prevented me from getting out of the state of restful vigil. During the 3rd session, I suddenly opened my eyes without even trying to. Zuleika, Lagorda and Josefina were staring at me. I was standing with them. I immediately realized that we were in some place completely unknown to me. The most obvious feature was a brilliant indirect light. The whole scene was inundated by a white, powerful, neon-like light. Zuleika was smiling as if inviting us to look around. Lagorda and Josefina seemed to be as cautious as I was. They gave me and Zuleika furtive glances. Zuleika signaled us to move around. We were outdoors, standing in the middle of a glaring circle. The ground seemed to be hard, dark rock, yet it reflected a great deal of the blinding white light which came from above. The strange thing was that, although I knew that the light was too intense for my eyes, I was not at all hurt when I looked up and spotted its source. It was the sun. I was staring directly at the sun which, perhaps due to the fact that I was dreaming, was intensely white. Lagorda and Josefina were also staring at the sun, apparently without any injurious effect. Suddenly I felt frightened. The light was alien to me. It was a merciless light. It seemed to attack us, creating a wind that I could feel. I could not sense any heat, however. I believed it to be malignant. In unison, Lagorda, Josefina and I huddled together like frightened children around Zuleika. She held us, and then the white glaring light began to diminish by degrees until it had completely vanished. In its place there was a mild, very soothing, yellowish light. I became aware then that we were not in this world. The ground was the color of wet terracotta. There were no mountains, but where we were standing was not flat land either. The ground was cracked and parched. It looked like a rough, dry sea of terracotta. I could see it all around me just as if I were in the middle of the ocean. I looked up. The sky had lost its maddening glare. It was dark, but not blue. A bright, incandescent star was near the horizon. It dawned on me at that instant that we were in a world with 2 suns, 2 stars. One was enormous and had gone over the horizon. The other was smaller or perhaps more distant. I wanted to ask questions, to walk around and look for things. Zuleika signaled us to relax, to wait patiently. But something seemed to be pulling us. Suddenly Lagorda and Josefina were gone. And I woke up. From that time on I never went back to Zuleika's house. Don Juan would make me shift levels of awareness in his own house or wherever we were, and I would enter into dreaming. Zuleika, Lagorda and Josefina were always waiting for me. We went back to the same unearthly scene over and over, until we were thoroughly familiar with it. Whenever we could do it, we would skip the time of glare the daytime and go there at night just in time to witness the rise over the horizon of a colossal celestial body, something of such magnitude that when it erupted over the jagged line of the horizon, it covered at least half of the 180-degree range in front of us. The celestial body was beautiful, and its ascent over the horizon was so breathtaking that I could have stayed there for an eternity just to witness that sight. The celestial body took up nearly the entire firmament when it reached the zenith. Invariably we would lie on our backs in order to gaze at it. It had consistent configurations, which Zuleika taught us to recognize. I realized that it was not a star. Its light was reflected. It must have been an opaque body, because the reflected light was mellow in relation to its monumental size. There were enormous, unchanging brown spots on its saffron yellow surface. Zuleika took us systematically on voyages that were beyond words. Lagorda said that Zuleika took Josefina even farther and deeper into the unknown, because Josefina was, just like Zuleika herself, quite a bit crazy. Neither of them had that core of rationality that supplies a dreamer with sobriety, thus they had no barriers and no interest in finding out rational causes or reasons for anything. The only thing that Zuleika told me about our journeys that sounded like an explanation was that the dreamer's power to focus on their second attention made them into living slingshots. The stronger and the more impeccable the dreamers were, the farther they could project their second attention into the unknown, and the longer their dreaming projection would last. Don Juan said that my journeys with Zuleika were no illusion, and that everything I had done with her was a step toward the control of the second attention. In other words, Zuleika was teaching me the perceptual bias of that other realm. He could not explain, however, the exact nature of those journeys, or perhaps he did not want to commit himself. He said that if he attempted to explain the perceptual bias of the second attention in terms of the perceptual bias of the first, he would only trap himself hopelessly in words. He wanted me to draw my own conclusion, and the more I thought about the whole matter, the clearer it became to me that his reluctance was functional. Under Zuleika's guidance during her instruction for the second attention, I made factual visitations to mysteries that were certainly beyond the scope of my reason, but obviously within the possibilities of my total awareness. I learned to voyage into something incomprehensible and ended up, like Emilito and Juan Tuma, having my own tales of eternity. And that's not all. Our experts and regular viewers respond to all comments. Also check if you forgot to subscribe and set your bell to receive notifications about new audiobooks and other useful self-development materials that we release regularly. Join in the discussions, don't forget to give likes and, if possible and inspired, support the development of the channel financially. All useful links will be in the description and the first attached comment. Goodness, love and wisdom to all. And now move on to watch the next part of the video at the links below, or choose something from the playlists of the channel and those you see on the screen.